Being a pastor is a very lonely job. And then I go through a period where I basically, hit rock bottom, right? Like I've learned that I've wasted a lot of time in my life, that I should have done this a long time ago.
Okay, so before the interview gets started, let me give you a backstory of why I chose to interview this pastor. This is Pastor Dan. He's the executive pastor at Elevate Church in Miami Lakes. But what makes him so interesting is his story. I mean, this guy dropped an 18-year career at Apple with stock incentives. Just to put into perspective, whether you're on iPhone or something, go on the stocks app and look at Apple 18 years ago. Look at the stock and look at it today. He had a lot of shares in Apple, so he gave all of that up to be a pastor. And let me tell you, being a pastor is not a job that you get into for the money. And so that is why I interviewed him. I'm curious about his decision making behind that process. What allowed him to have so much trust in God that he left a job that he prayed for, a job that he was making money, to be a pastor. After hearing your story, you'll see exactly why people say just trust in God, trust in his plan, because his story is literally just that. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the video, and remember that this is a place where learning becomes entertaining. Okay, so for those of you that don't know Dan, he's the executive pastor here at Elevate in Miami Lakes, right? Thank you for your time.
Absolutely, man.
But on top of that, I think what's interesting is your rise to becoming a pastor, right? To kind of sum it up, you came from an 18-year career.
Yep.
Right, at Apple. And I was curious because I want to follow up this question. I did some research at your old job, right? A Verizon account executive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there was. Based on Indeed.com, your salary was somewhere around 6 digits, a little bit over 100,000.
Yeah, don't make me cry, bro.
Don't make-
I miss those
I have
days, man. Nah.
Because I have an interesting follow up with that. But is that a fair guess?
It is. I mean, honestly, coming from the corporate world and with that many years of experience, you move up, right? So
Yeah.
the salary package was very nice. It was over 6 digits.
So
yeah.
so let me ask you, what made you comfortable leaving that number?
Man, I'll tell you, I don't think I've ever shared it, at least this publicly, right? So my journey out was not an overnight journey, if that makes any sense. Like leaving Apple wasn't just like overnight. For a while, for a long time, I knew that God was calling me into ministry full time. I didn't know what that looked like. And then for a long time, I was in student ministry kind of growing up, and then had a healthy student ministry at a Spanish church. Got to meet Pastor Lewis. He and I kind of connected over the years. But my success in the corporate world was thriving. So in my mind, I said, okay, well, I'm a faithful tither, and people don't like talking about tithing, especially as a pastor. Like, you talk about tithing, it's like, oh, that guy's like, I get rich. But like, no, we're not. But my wife and I, this is before I was a full-time pastor or anything, we were faithful tithers. So in my mind, I said, okay, well, God, you're calling me into ministry, but I'm helping provide financially through my tithe. So I kind of like felt like, okay, this is the purpose where he's kind of, in my mind, this is kind of why the acceleration in my career was taking place, if that makes sense. But when I kind of knew that there was more, it wasn't like, this was not my end, my corporate life. Like I was telling you before, I was traveling like Monday through Friday, Tuesday through Thursday, and it wasn't fulfilling anymore, man. I got to see almost every state in the U.S. because I was one of the only Spanish speakers, hard to believe, within my team. I was managing Puerto Rico. I got to go to Mexico a few times. Like, I got to see a bunch, and it wasn't even worth it. Like, it wasn't fulfilling. So, as I started preparing, one of the biggest obstacles for me was the financial. How does that even make sense? How do you walk away from a 6-figure salary, which gives you incentives and stocks, which is a lot higher than 6 digits, going over to a church where there's no way like that. Like, you don't go to church, you don't like wake up in the morning and say, hey, you know what, I want to become a pastor because I want to have an easy life, I want to retire, and I want to, like, no, like, you're gonna be in the struggle bus for sure. But through a lot of prayer and honestly preparing, it's been the biggest leap of faith in my life, man.
So let me ask you, who was Dan before becoming a pastor? Because I know you said you were somewhat affiliated with the church.
Yeah, so let me go way back.
Okay.
My grandfather was a pastor. I did not grow up with my grandfather. My grandfather was a pastor
Okay.
in Cuba. He didn't come to the U.S. until like the early, or I should say the late 80s.
Okay.
So by then I was a young little punk. And then here comes this man, which I've never really met. And I'm being honest. Like I had my my dad's parents, my grandmother on my dad's side, she passed when he was 7. So I had, obviously zero chance of meeting her. My dad's father passed also in Cuba. I never got to meet him.
Okay.
So I grew up without grandparents. I grew up with a nanny, right? La abuelita from the neighborhood that took care of me when my mom was working.
Yeah.
She became my grandmother. Like, you know. So when my grandfather came over, um, I didn't have a real relationship with him. I got to see him and meet him, my grandmother on my mom's side. But all that to say that I was kind of like brought up in church. So my grandfather was a pastor, my mom was a PK, right, a pastor's kid. She was very faithful, my dad as well. So I grew up always in church. And that's kind of like part of my testimony where I tell my kids, like,
Hmm.
listen, just because, your mom and dad are bringing you to church, it doesn't make you a Christian until you decide. Like, it's on you, right? Like, you
Yeah.
get a head start because you get exposed, but it's on to you.
Going back to the that period of transition, right,
Hmm.
to coming becoming a pastor and leaving your career job. When did it take you? Like, did you trust God automatically when you quit the job, or even when you became a pastor, the early days, you're like,
That's a good,
why?
that's a
Like,
good question. So I believe that I knew I was called to be a pastor. Um, it was a mission trip, but it was in the U.S. mission trip to Boston with our previous church. Like I really felt the Lord pulling, right, and pulling and pulling,
okay.
and then I developed at Apple at any major corporation.
Hmm.
It's you have a mixed bag of believers. You have a lot of atheists that work,
Yeah,
especially in
corporate.
a
Yeah,
in corporate world.
of course.
So you do your best to shine your light there and kind of like point people to Christ, and eventually you start, connecting with people, and I developed friendships at Apple
Okay.
Strong that I still have to today. And it got to the point where we would sit down after like a long meeting, or if we were traveling, we were visiting
Hmm.
customers, we would having dinner, and start talking about life. And I noticed a pattern where I would always land on, man, but I don't think this is it. I don't think like Apple is it. And I love Apple. I mean, I'm still
I see the
rocking Apple
Apple, the
everywhere.
first Apple back there.
Yeah, I love the people. The people are amazing. But I felt like, man, like this is not it. So for me, it was a process because I guess the best way I can explain it, like I kind of felt it, but I thought it was just kind of like me. Like, oh, that's just Dan kind of thinking that maybe becoming a full-time pastor or giving the rest of my life the time.
Hmm.
But I'm like, man, is this a God thing? So I'm a very simple guy.
Okay.
I started asking the Lord between my wife and I'm like, man, God, if you're really leading me down this path, make it so obvious. Like, open the right doors before me and close the wrong ones. And I
Okay.
would be honest with the Lord. I'm like, I'm a pretty dumb guy. I'm gonna try to open the door, even if it's closed. So if it's really not your will, man, close that door.
Did you believe it was God calling you to become a pastor back then?
I did. At the beginning, I thought it was just my idea.
So let me ask you, when he was calling on you, you said it was around 2009, 11 that you felt that
Right
calling.
after. Yeah,
What?
2010.
How come you
I
didn't
mean,
answer?
2000 and,
One.
2001, yeah.
So how come you didn't answer the call then?
Me, myself, fear, right? At that time, you don't want to let go of what you have. And I went through a lot. So there's a lot more to my story so like in 2001, shortly after that, I feel like the Lord calling me into that. A part of the story that a lot of people still don't know is that I got married very, very young, man. I got married, I was engaged at 19. I got married when I was 20.
Wow.
And that relationship did not last. I went through a divorce. A lot of people don't know. I had 0 kids with that lady. She's a great person, but there was infidelity in the relationship on her part. Um, and I always say that it's equal 50-50 because at that time I wasn't being the leader of the house. I wasn't being the man of God. I mean, there was no God in our marriage, to be honest. Even though I grew up in church, that's why I always tell people, man, it's really up to you to have it. So after I feel the Lord calling me into ministry, but that partnership with her was not there. She was not in agreement. So that delayed my calling. And then I go through a divorce, and then I go through a period where I basically, hit rock bottom, right? Like I, God hates divorce. It's biblical, right? Like there's very limited area for divorce in scripture, and it specifically outlines either death, it outlines that there's infidelity, and in my case there was. And even though I try to bring like forgiveness and repentance back, I'll tell you, during that, so here I feel like the Lord's calling me to become a pastor. My marriage falls apart, and I go through this, and then I get this sense of like wait, like man, like I knew better to lead my home, and I wasn't incorporating God into our relationship. I wasn't incorporating God to our home, even though we had no kids. And then I felt this weight of man, like she sinned, and I'm leaving her astray. Like it's over. So believe it or not, I went after her to bring her back to the Lord. And listen, um, even at that, I didn't do a good job. I remember very vague conversations, like trying to get her back to a church, and eventually she did, and we went our separate ways. Um, that for sure had a major impact on my calling. Like I just did it. So at that point, then I'm like, oh, I can be a pastor.
So it delayed your answer, you think?
It for sure. It delayed me, and it's like at that point, can I even be a pastor? Like I'm divorced, even though I physically maybe didn't, do anything wrong per se, but still, like that's a tag.
There's a verse, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7. Walk by faith, not by sight.
Hmm.
What do you think about that verse?
Man, listen, if you don't believe that verse, man, call me up. Put my number on the screen. I don't know if you want, like I can tell you. And listen, and I get it. A lot of people have sometimes a mistrust of God because of us, because of people. I think a lot of times you'll hear a pastor preach, and there's a lot of bad doctrine out there, unfortunately,
Yeah.
where it's like, oh, the gospel is like a get rich thing. It's not.
Mm.
It's not a get rich at all. Like you're gonna probably get poor, but man, like God provides. Like we have a roof over our heads. We got food on the table every night.
Hmm.
I can honestly tell you that we are better off today than we were back then, and the numbers make no sense. They're not the same, and yet we're better off. Like I
Yeah.
am living proof, man.
And another verse that I want to say, kind of relating back to your stories, that I think in Ecclesiastes, is that how you say it?
Ecclesiastes.
Okay,
Yeah.
I always have trouble saying
Yeah.
that one. It said, and a little bit of a quote because the exact verse I remember, it was, there will be good and bad, but God has made one as well as the other. Meaning that the good and bad in your life, bad situations, good
Yeah.
situations, they both come from God. My question is, I know you talked about your divorce and that was a very low moment. You felt rock bottom there. Was there a specific moment becoming a pastor that you felt that rock bottom? Like not the divorce, because I know that was early 2000 back then. Like when you became a pastor that you felt a rock bottom, you felt, why? Like, why am I here?
No. Have I gone through really tough patches as a pastor, man? 1000%.
How do you get over that?
You fa- a lot of God. So I'll give you a couple. So, as a student pastor, I went through a moment where bad, bad theology reached the church, by people, and maybe they were misinformed, and whatever the case, but that bad theology started to spread in a very negative way.
Mm-hmm.
And man, it was crushing. And if you've ever speak to a pastor and they tell you that they're super popular, you're constantly hanging out with people and having,
Mm-hmm.
you're the life of the party, like that's all a lie, bro. Being a pastor is a very lonely job. Um, I talked with pastor, and I'm not even the senior pastor, right? Like I'm the backup quarterback, if you will, and I'm totally okay with that. But a lot of times it's like, Pastor Lewis and I, Hector, Jerry, like we talk, and it's like we're it. Like, so there's a lot of lonely moments as a pastor. So when that moment hit me with that bad theology, and the people that I loved, man, I didn't know how to handle it. I'm like, man, God, like why is this happening? And everything that I would physically try to do to correct, it was like not working, and I found myself in my room, in my office at home, man, like on the floor crying like a baby. And I don't like the only other person that knows this is my wife and maybe Pastor Lewis. And I was crying like a baby, and I was crying to God. I'm like, God, man, like I can't, like I can't stop this. And it's not even towards me. Like they're attacking you. Like this is bad
Yeah.
theology on you. They're saying that you're not God. Like you are. Like man, and I literally prayed for that to be silenced. And eventually it was.
Interesting.
As a pastor, you go through, you walk with people in their darkest moments. You know, over my head, we had a beautiful little angel, right, that passed away, Gabby, walking with her parents. Like, man, like that, I carry that. You know, like I think about that little. I think about the parents. I think about the dad. The dad's a hero, man. The dad sacrifices his life. He's a law enforcement, literally risking his life every day for
Yeah.
us, and his little baby girl is no longer like you carry that. So there's a lot of moments as a pastor that you carry people's burdens, people's hurts, their financial troubles, their marital problems. You just can't turn that off. So
Mhm.
how you get through that, man, like you, it's more of a reason to dive into scripture and to hold on to his truths, because then you're reading his truth and you're reading like, man,
Yeah.
you know, like like in Psalms, I think Psalms 46, you know, David starts painting this picture of this war, and he's kind of going through like, man, like the earth is melting and all, and then he gets down to, I think, verse 10. Don't quote me, I should know this on memory, but
Yeah.
I think it's verse 10. He's like, man, be still, know that I'm God. And we
Yeah.
take that verse and we kind of overplay it, but in my mind, it's like the verse right before that, he's talking about like the war ceasing. It's like that, be still. It's like, hey, surrender. Yeah, I got this. I'm God,
Mhm.
you're not. But also, not only for us, the believer, man, but for like the enemy. Like, man, like be still. Like he stopped the war. So
Interesting.
think about it. There's a war. It's not two good people fighting. It's
Yeah.
good and bad.
Yeah.
And for him to have that power and that authority over evil. So you read that as a pastor when you have those rock bottom moments and you're encouraged. You know, I preach
Yeah.
the Prince of Peace, the the author of peace,
Creator.
the creator
Peace.
of peace.
Exactly.
It's like,
That's what
come
it
on.
is. I find it interesting because not a lot of people would do what you did, right? They hear the calling from God, but they say, "Hold up, I could still serve God from my salary. I could
Yeah.
still, like you said, you're giving tithing, so hey, I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm right with God." And I wanna wrap it up with two last questions. I know you talked about loneliness, as there's a lot of loneliness
Mm-hmm.
in being a pastor, and actually I was talking to the executive vice president of Memorial, and he was saying the same thing. He was like, leadership is so lonely. Like, you don't understand, leadership is very lonely because everybody looks for you to the decisions. And guess what? You may not have the answers, but you have to come up with it on your own.
Yeah, the weight is on you.
What have you learned in the midst of that loneliness?
Let me go back to one thing, because on that transition out, you know, one thing I did ask God, and I didn't share this. One thing I did ask God, and if you're listening, if you're watching, man, like maybe this is something that you need to do. I asked God to make me uncomfortable at Apple.
Explain that.
Um, Kind of like for me to confirm. I'm like, man, God, like here's my career. I'm 18, 19 years in. Like I'm looking at the last final, I don't know, 5, 10 years. I want to retire early. Like I had a game plan, right? Like I
Okay.
want to retire. Um, I'm like, Lord, so for me, it was a, a good review, a good promotion. It was, hey, you're next for XYZ. And I'm like, man, Lord, I'm never gonna leave. Like I don't need to be pushed out of the boat. I don't want to be, I don't want everything. I don't want to be a Job, right? But like I'm like, God, make me a little uncomfortable. And look at this. This is kind of crazy. The uncomfortable season in my life at Apple wasn't in a negative way. So right before I leave, in that last year, I think it took me, if I'm honest, it took me to leave Apple
Mm-hmm.
8 months, maybe a little bit longer, to really process this, right? And even to like physically hand over some, responsibilities and things. Um, but in that let's just call it that last year,
Okay.
I had one of the best reviews of my life at Apple. And with a good review, you get a good bonus. And with a good bonus, you get stocks and blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. Which I would not get to see, right? Because I'm out. And then that's not having begun to vest. Um, I got offered I guess my uncomfortable moments were I didn't want to travel as much. I was traveling constantly.
Okay.
So I get offered a position here in the state of Florida where I wouldn't have to travel. I got offered a position here in Florida to manage Latin America, which was a major promotion, more lucrative stuff. I even got an offer to move out to California. So like, and that's when I was like, man, I'm asking to be uncomfortable, but then like they're rolling out the red carpet. And I had a very, I remember getting back home after I got my last offer, right? My to stay I got a call from a friend at Apple and said, hey, so and so is retiring. She manages a large part of the business at Latin America. Like, man, like if you want it, it's yours. You have the tenure at Apple.
That's
You
tough.
speak Spanish. You're a local guy. You're it. Like you would be a slam. And then of course, in their perspective, it was the financials and da da da. And it's humbling, right? It's humbling. You're like, man, like because you never, I think as a leader, you never think that you're that leader, right? Like I don't know, I hopefully you're a humble leader, right? But you never think that you're really that strong in leadership skills.
Okay.
I remember driving back home and I walked in and I sat down on my couch and I told my wife, I'm like, hey, you're not gonna believe this one. Look at what I just got offered. And bro, I'd be lying if I didn't sit down and be like, all right, we're like, man, like if I'm gonna stay another 10 years and all those thoughts, well, God, if I'm gonna make this much more, man, we're about to start the building project. Like, man, I can financially help and maybe
Yeah.
we can make a sacrifice, whatever. And my wife, who was a stay-at-home mom, my oldest is 13, and we decided for her to stay at home since she was like 8 months pregnant. So she's been at home now for 13 years or 12 and a
Okay.
half. She just went back to work. Um, she was like, but babe, that's everything that we haven't been praying for. Like you've been praying to be uncomfortable. You've been praying that to God allow you to stay here more because you want to give more time to the church. You see the church growing and that there's need there that you feel called to. I'm like, man, you're a better Christian than me. You're right. Like what was I like? It's a quick snap back to
It's
reality.
interesting that you asked for uncomfort. And I think it's a trick from the devil that he gives you what you wanted most. That you got pushed even more
Even
when you
more.
want to say, hey, you sure you want to leave? Because you have that calling. And that uncomfortable came from not where you thought it was going to come
No,
from.
no.
It came from a different avenue. Because I think there was I think it was a preaching that he says the devil doesn't bring anything new. He just amplifies your desires already. So if your
Bag of old
desire is,
tricks.
hey,
Yeah.
I like my salary, I feel comfortable with this. Oh, you want to go to pastor? Okay, here. I'm gonna offer you some more money at
Yeah.
Apple. I'm gonna give you more incentives. Let me see how uncomfortable you get. It's interesting. But going back to loneliness, like, did you
Yes.
learn what you learn about loneliness?
From it, I've learned, not right away, but I've learned that loneliness could be healthy, and that it could be good. So loneliness is a negative, right? Obviously, nobody
Cool.
wants to be alone. But man, in the loneliness, you have a couple of options. You can stay lonely. You can have the pity party. You can go that route, or you can really get grounded in being a pastor. Man, it gets the biggest push to stay grounded in His Word and His truth, right? I think as a leader, same way. Like, man, as a leader, if you get grounded in Scripture, like if you look at the Bible, there's so many leaders in the Bible. So maybe you don't have the calling to become a pastor. Maybe you have the calling to be a leader at your job, at your corporation, in whatever field you're in, but to be that biblical leader, that one that brings in the salt and the light.
Yeah.
Man, the loneliness is it's like a seminary. It's like a training ground. Like as long as you spend that loneliness time, that whenever you find yourself like down and out,
Okay.
to get grounded in the Word, man.
Interesting. So it's an opportunity to get more grounded.
Yeah, you can miss it, right? You can get lonely, and then you can get mad at the world and like, oh, I can't believe this. This is look at me. Look at the story of Job, right? Like Job hit rock bottom,
Literally.
and everybody, his wife, everybody was like, man, just like curse God and like let's go get this over with. But what did he do in his loneliness? Like
Trusted the Lord.
he
Yeah.
held on. Like that was, I think
And
that's
and I think what's even interesting is even in his story, because people think I think people think sometimes that when you've accepted the life of being a Christian, right? You've accepted okay, I'm gonna follow Jesus
Yeah.
even through the good and bad. That's the trick. When it's good, you praise him,
Yeah,
but when it's
absolutely.
bad, praise him too, because it comes from him. Even Job, his story, he went to God and questioned him. It's like, why? Like, if I'm, why do you need me? Why? He still questioned him,
Mm-hmm.
but nonetheless, he stayed obedient. His friends, it was like 3 of his friends, right, that told him that they came to the village and like, you have nothing, like, just admit, and they started blaming, oh, there's something that you did,
Yeah.
that you caused this.
Yeah.
It was something, he's like, no, I'm not crazy, I'm not crazy. And then guess what? The Lord came back, blessed him, I think 10 times. What he had, the kids, the farm, everything, he came back with that. And I think it's interesting that everybody goes to that. Everybody goes to a period where they hit rock bottom, that loneliness, but at the same time, the Lord is always there. I think that's
Absolutely, yeah.
that's the big key. What I want to know, the big takeaway, is after all that your career, now becoming a pastor, seeing the people turn to Christ, seeing everything, what have you learned about God?
Man, his faithfulness, it's crazy. His faithfulness is crazy. I've learned that I've wasted a lot of time in my life, that I should have done this a long time ago. I've learned, although I wouldn't change anything, because I think throughout my whole life journey, like, I've learned so much. Um, but I've learned that his faithfulness to me, it's crazy. Uh, like, and you kind of know the story of our church, but man, like we have seen God move in such mighty ways in the smallest of things, in some super large things, you know. But it's like, man, the faithfulness there. I often tell people, like, that God, and this is not biblical or nothing like that, but that I believe God is a God of, like, breadcrumbs. Like, he's gonna give you a breadcrumb, right, to follow him, right? And not that he's gonna give you, like, like something, money or anything.
Yeah.
No, but he's giving you, like, come on, like, just follow me, right? Like, follow me. But what happens if you're following a trail of breadcrumbs and you go a different path, you're not gonna find any bread. Like, you've lost your way. But God just gives you enough to kind of keep you coming, as long as you follow. And I think where we go wrong often as people, man, it's like, we see other breads, right? That it might be larger, might be more delicious, might be, and we start following our own breadcrumbs, right? Or leaving our own breadcrumbs. And it just leads to a disaster. So what I've learned is that God's faithfulness is true. God's faithfulness, I keep saying crazy in a good way. It's mind blowing. And if I wish I would have trusted his faithfulness to how I do today much earlier in my life. But I wouldn't change anything in my life. I would still go through the hard moments. I would still go back and learn all that, right? Because I feel that it was the way that it was my journey,
And I think your story is very interesting, very impactful, because a lot of people may be going through that. I don't know if you're going through that they're in a position in their life where they're saying, do I leave the thing that I wanted most? Do I leave the thing that I prayed for? Jesus said, if you're not willing to deny yourself every day, if you can't take up your cross every day, you can't follow me. Yeah. That's his calling. He says, deny yourself and follow me. Yeah. Deny yourself, and every day you have to do it. Maybe this is your calling. This is your spark, that you should take that leap of faith, that you should trust in him. And I think your story clearly shows it. And it's interesting because you're not done here. It's still going. It's still developing. But I really thank you for your time. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. I hope you guys learned a lot too. Anything you want to leave for any people that are skeptical about, I don't know about that religion stuff? Anything you want to leave for?
Listen, I highly encourage you to ask the questions. Find yourself a really good Bible believing church in your area. Drop a comment on his page, on the video. If you want to know anything else, we'd be happy to connect and bring you some truth. If you don't have a healthy church, come check us out if you want. But there are a lot of good, healthy churches out there. But don't be skeptical. And listen, if God is calling you to take that leap, pray and be like a dance. Say, man, God, open the right doors, close the wrong ones. I am dumb enough to try to open that wrong door. So make sure it's really like sealed shut. Yeah. But at the end of the day, if God's calling you, man, just follow God's calling. He's got you.
I like that. I'm dumb enough to open the one you close. I like that, and I hope you guys made it to the end. And like you said, Don't be skeptical, but question, because Jesus said something. He said, all those who seek the truth, they end up to me. So ask, hey, where's God? Ask someone that believes in God to see that you'll end up in front of Jesus. So thank you for your time. Hope you guys made it to the end. And if you did, check out, I'm going to tag the church. I'm going to add your links. Check out the clips on Instagram, and I'll see you guys on the next one.